The medical tent smelled like copper and sweat. Alara Voss wiped her hands on her shirt and looked down at the small creature shaking on the cot. The child was Thro, gray skin, 4 arms, black eyes too large for her tiny face. She was 5 years old. Her name was Illick, and she was dying. The infection had spread through both lungs. On Earth, a simple shot would fix it in 2 days. Out here on HFY War, a dusty border world at the edge of Thrall space, Alara had the medicine sitting right there on her shelf. She had carried it across 6 star systems in a bag that also held granola bars and a photograph of her mother. The problem was not the medicine. The problem was the law. Illick belonged to the lower caste of Thrall society. According to their ancient religious laws, lower caste members could not receive medicine that had been blessed for the upper castes. All medicine in Thrall space was blessed. It was a system designed thousands of years ago to make sure the poor stayed sick and the powerful stayed comfortable. And the Galactic Council had never once questioned it because the Thrall held 40 seats and nobody wanted to make them angry. Alara was 19 years old. She had come to HFY War as a volunteer aid worker because she wanted to help people. She had not come here to watch a child choke to death on her own lungs because of some ancient rule written by people who had never held a dying kid in their arms. She looked at the medicine. She looked at Illick. The child reached up with one of her 4 small hands and grabbed Alara's finger. Alara gave her the shot. Illick's breathing eased within an hour. She fell asleep holding a stuffed toy that Alara had made from bandages and tape. She would live. Alara was arrested the next morning. The Thrall religious enforcers came at dawn. There were 6 of them, tall and armored, carrying staffs that hummed with energy. They dragged Alara out of the medical tent while the refugees watched in silence. Nobody moved to help. Nobody could. The enforcers read the charges in a flat, cold voice. Violation of the Covenant of Purity. Contamination of sacred resources. The penalty was death. They put energy shackles on her wrists and took her off-world within the hour. She did not get to say goodbye to Illick, 12,000 light years away. In the massive rotating station that held the Galactic Council, Ambassador Callum Rhett received the news and felt something go very cold and very still inside his chest. Rhett was 61 years old. He had served in 2 wars, buried friends on 3 different planets, and spent the last 9 years representing Earth in a council that treated humanity the way a rich man treats a stray dog, with occasional scraps and constant contempt. Humans had 1 seat on the council, 1 vote out of 416. They had joined the galactic community only 30 years ago, and most species still thought of them as loud, short-lived, overly emotional primitives who had barely figured out faster than light travel. Rhett had learned to be patient. He had learned to smile when ancient alien politicians insulted his species. He had learned to play the long game, to pick his battles, to trade favors and build alliances in the shadows. But when he read the report about Alara Voss, a 19-year-old girl who had saved a child and was now going to die for it, something inside him shifted. Not broke, shifted, like a gear clicking into a position it had been waiting to reach for years. He requested an emergency session of the council. It took him 14 hours to get it. When he finally stood in that enormous chamber, surrounded by hundreds of alien delegates in their floating seats, he made his case with the calm precision of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. He laid out the facts. Alara was a civilian aid worker operating under galactic humanitarian law. The Covenant of Purity had never been applied to a non-Thrall citizen. The child she saved would have died without treatment. He cited 17 precedents, 4 treaty clauses, and the Council's own founding charter, which specifically mentioned the protection of those who act in the service of life. The Thrall delegation listened with the expression of someone watching an insect crawl across their dinner plate. High Arbiter Zorvan, the eldest and most powerful member of the Thrall Dominion, rose to speak. He was ancient, over 300 years old, and his voice carried the weight of centuries of absolute authority. He called Alara a criminal. He called humanity a minor infestation that the Council tolerated out of pity. He said the execution would proceed as scheduled, and he recommended it be broadcast live on the Galactic Common Feed as a reminder to all species of the supremacy of Council law. The vote was 387 to 29. Alara would die, and 4 trillion beings across 4,200 worlds would watch. Rhett stood in that chamber after the vote and said nothing. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He looked at Zorvan for a long time, and Zorvan looked back with the satisfied expression of someone who had just stepped on something small. Then Rhett walked out. He went to his office. He sat down at his desk. He opened a secure channel to Earth and typed a single message to the Secretary General, to the Joint Chiefs, to every human outpost and ship in the galaxy. The message read, "They are going to kill one of ours. The whole galaxy will be watching, so let them watch." Then he opened a second channel. This one was not official. It went to people he had been talking to quietly for years, journalists, activists, engineers, captains of small ships, members of species who had their own reasons to hate the Council. He sent them a different message. This one read, "It starts tomorrow. Be ready." He closed the channel and sat in the dark for a long time. Somewhere on Thrall Prime, a 19-year-old girl was sitting in a cell, probably scared, probably cold, probably wondering if anyone was coming. Rhett could not save her through politics. He had just proven that. The system was not broken. The system was working exactly as designed. It was designed to crush people like Alara and protect people like Zorvan. So Rhett was going to break the system. The next day, the Galactic Common Feed activated for the first time in 200 years. A countdown appeared on every screen, every holodisplay, every neural feed across the galaxy. 4 trillion beings saw it. Most of them tuned in expecting a spectacle, a quick execution, a reminder of who was in charge, something to watch over dinner. They had no idea what was coming. None of them did. Not the Council, not the Thrall, not even Rhett, because none of them understood what happened when you put a human in front of a camera and tried to break her. The execution arena on Thrall Prime was older than most civilizations. It was carved from black stone and shaped like a bowl, with seats rising up in every direction until they disappeared into the gray sky. It could hold 200,000 Thrall, and every seat was full. The crowd hummed with a low, hungry sound, like a machine warming up. At the center of the arena, a raised platform stood under harsh white lights. The execution block was made of the same black stone as the walls. There were stains on it that no one had bothered to clean. They were meant to be seen. The Galactic Common Feed was live. Cameras floated around the arena like metal insects, capturing every angle. In homes, ships, stations, and colonies across 4,200 worlds, 4 trillion beings watched their screens. Most had tuned in out of curiosity. Public executions had not been broadcast in 2 centuries. It felt like history. It felt like entertainment. Then they brought out the girl. Alara Voss walked into the arena between 2 Thrall guards who were each 3 times her size. Her hands were locked in energy shackles that glowed faint blue. She was thin. Her clothes were torn. There was a bruise on the left side of her face, dark purple against her pale skin. She had not slept in days, and it showed in the shadows under her eyes and the way she held herself. Careful, like everything hurt, but she was walking on her own. They had not dragged her. They had not carried her. She walked. The crowd roared when they saw her. 200,000 Thrall screaming for blood, their voices shaking the ancient stone. Alara flinched at the sound. Just once. Then she straightened her back and kept walking toward the platform. High Arbiter Zorvan stood at the edge of the platform in ceremonial robes of deep red. He raised one hand and the crowd went silent. He began to read the charges in a voice that echoed across the arena and across the galaxy. He spoke of the sacred covenant of purity. He spoke of the crime of contamination. He spoke of Alara as if she were a disease, something small and dirty that needed to be cut away. The forge spread. He called humanity a minor species. He called them primitive, emotional, and dangerously irrational. He said the council had been too patient with them, too generous, and that this execution would serve as a correction, a reminder that the galaxy had rules, and that those rules existed to maintain order. When he finished, he looked down at Alara with an expression of total contempt. He expected her to cry. He expected her to beg. Every species he had ever broken had begged eventually. That was the point of the arena. That was the point of the lights and the cameras and the crowd. You made them small. You made them afraid. And then you showed the galaxy what happened to small, afraid things. Alara did not cry. She did not beg. She looked up at the camera floating closest to her face. She looked directly into the lens, directly into the eyes of 4 trillion watching beings, and she spoke. "My name is Alara Voss," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. The arena's sound system picked it up and carried it everywhere. "I am a nurse from Alberta, Earth. I gave medicine to a dying child. Her name is Illick. She is 5 years old." She paused. "I would do it again." Silence. Not just in the arena. Across the galaxy, in living rooms and cockpits and hospital wards and prison cells, there was silence. 4 trillion beings held their breath at the same moment, and the galaxy contracted around a single point, a thin, bruised girl standing in a pool of white light, refusing to be afraid. Then the comment streams exploded. On every world, on every network, in every language the translators could handle, people began to react. Not the polite, distant reactions of citizens watching the news. These were raw, angry, desperate, millions of messages per second crashing through the feeds like a wave. On the water world of Morith, an elderly female watched the broadcast from a floating shelter. She had lost 2 daughters when the council sterilized her colony 40 years ago. She saw Alara's face and started to shake. She typed one word into the feed. Remember. On a Gorath warship, decommissioned and rusting in orbit around a dead moon, Commander Drennick stood on his empty bridge and watched the screen. The Gorath had tried to rebel against the council 30 years ago. They had been crushed, disarmed, humiliated. Their ships were stripped of weapons. Their pride was stripped of everything else. Drennick had spent 3 decades living with the taste of defeat in his mouth. Now he watched a human girl, small enough for him to hold in one hand, stare down an empire without blinking. His claws dug into the armrest of his chair until the metal groaned. On a Vellani news station, the journalist Keshori sat in her broadcast booth with her headset on and her microphone live. She was an insectoid, 4 arms, compound eyes, delicate wings folded against her back. She had been assigned to provide neutral commentary on the execution, professional, detached, balanced. She had done this kind of work for 20 years. She watched Alara speak. She watched the crowd scream for blood. She watched Zorvan smile. She said nothing. Her microphone was live, and she said absolutely nothing. Across the galaxy, millions of viewers noticed her silence. It was louder than any words she could have spoken. On the platform, the executioner stepped forward. He was enormous, the largest Thrall in the arena, chosen specifically for the role. He carried the ceremonial blade, a curved weapon designed not for speed, but for suffering. The execution was meant to be slow. That was tradition. That was the point. The crowd began to chant. Alara watched the executioner approach. She was trembling now, not from the cold, not from weakness, but from the effort of standing still when every part of her body was screaming at her to run. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. She could feel the shackles burning her wrists. She thought about Illick. She thought about the way the child had grabbed her finger and held on. She thought about her mother back on Earth, who was probably watching this right now, who was probably screaming at a screen, who she would never see again. And then Alara Voss, 19 years old and absolutely terrified, did something that no one in that arena expected. She started to hum. It was a song from Earth, an old one, a lullaby her mother used to sing. The melody was simple, the kind of tune that had been passed down through so many generations that nobody remembered who wrote it. The translator systems across the galaxy tried to process it and failed. There were no words to translate. It was just sound, just a melody, just a girl humming in the dark. But it carried. Through the microphones, through the feed, through the silence between the stars. 4 trillion beings heard it, and most of them did not understand it. But something in that simple tune reached into their chests and squeezed. The executioner hesitated. Not because of mercy, because the sound confused him. Thrall did not sing. Thrall did not make music before death. He did not know what to do with a creature that hummed while the blade was coming down. In the council gallery, Ambassador Rhett watched from behind the glass. His face showed nothing. His hands, hidden beneath the railing, were shaking. He reached into his coat and pressed a single button on a device he had been carrying for 9 years, waiting for the right moment. Across the galaxy, every human ship, station, outpost, and embassy received the same one-word signal. It arrived in the middle of Alara's song, cutting through every secure channel like a knife. The word was witness. Rhett did not know if it would be enough. He did not know if anything would be enough. But the feed was live, and the girl was singing. And somewhere in the vast machinery of the galaxy, something ancient and enormous was beginning to move. He could feel it the way you feel a storm before you see the clouds. The executioner raised the blade. 10 minutes had passed. The galaxy was watching. And it was already too late to stop what came next. Minute 11. Kashari broke. She had been silent for over a minute, an eternity in live broadcasting. Her producers were screaming in her earpiece, telling her to speak, to say something neutral, to describe the proceedings like a professional. She reached up with one of her 4 hands and pulled the earpiece out. She dropped it on the floor. Then she leaned into her microphone and spoke to the galaxy. "I am watching a child be murdered for kindness," she said. Her voice was steady, but her wings were trembling behind her back. If you are watching too, ask yourself, when did we become this? The council censors cut her feed within 4 seconds. It did not matter. In those 4 seconds, her words had already been captured, copied, and shared across 10,000 networks. By the time the censors realized what had happened, the quote was everywhere. Painted on walls, printed on screens, whispered in languages that had no word for rebellion until that moment. Minute 13. In the council chamber, Ambassador Rhett stood and did something that no representative of any species had ever done in the 4,000-year history of the Galactic Council. He invoked Article 0. Article 0 was a clause buried in the original Council Charter, written by the founding species back when the Council was meant to be something noble. It stated that any member species could challenge the fundamental legitimacy of the Council itself if the Council acted in clear violation of sapient rights. It was a safety switch, a way to tear the whole thing down and start over if things ever went too far. Nobody had ever used it. Nobody had ever been desperate enough, or brave enough, or stupid enough. The clause was considered a historical curiosity, like a fire alarm in a building that everyone assumed could never burn. Rhett pulled the alarm. The council dismissed it immediately. Zorvan laughed. He actually laughed, a dry, rattling sound that echoed through the chamber. He said Article 0 required a majority vote to proceed, and humanity did not have the votes. He said it was a desperate act by a desperate species, and he turned back to watch the execution. He should not have laughed. Across the galaxy, people heard that laugh. They heard the most powerful being in the council laugh at the idea that sapient rights mattered. And something in the collective gut of 4 trillion beings turned over. Minute 15. The Marath homeworld, a water planet of 6 billion souls who had been paying tribute to the Council for a century, transmitted a single official message to the Council Trade Authority. All tribute shipments are suspended effective immediately. We will resume when the girl is free. Within seconds, the Villani did the same. Then the Kasari mining colonies. Then the Dren agricultural worlds. Then a dozen other species whose names most council members had never bothered to learn. Within 3 minutes, 14 species had cut their economic ties to the council. Not because Rhett asked them to. Not because any human had contacted them. They did it because Alara was still humming on that platform, and the executioner's blade was still raised, and they could not sit in their homes and watch it happen and do nothing. The council's economic monitors began flashing red. The Thrall delegation demanded immediate military response. Zorvan called it a temporary tantrum. He was wrong. Minute 17. Commander Drennick of the Gorath fleet stood on his bridge and gave an order he'd been waiting 30 years to give. Power up everything, he said. His officers stared at him. Their ships were decommissioned. The council had stripped their weapons, locked their engines, and left them floating in the dark as a monument to failure. But Drennick had not been idle during those 30 years. His engineers had been quietly rebuilding, piece by piece, part by part, hiding their work inside maintenance logs and repair orders. The engines were not locked anymore. The weapons were not gone anymore. The Gorath fleet roared to life. Drennick opened a broadcast channel, not encrypted, not private, but open for every ship and station in the galaxy to hear. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. The Gorath remember what it is to kneel, he said. Today, we choose to stand. Any who stand with us, fall in. Minute 19. 12 more fleets responded to Drennick's call. Some were military, old warships from species that had been quietly preparing for years. But most were not. Freighters loaded with cargo. Mining barges that had never fired a weapon. Science vessels crewed by researchers who had never seen combat. Civilian transport ships carrying families who had heard the broadcast and told their captains to change course. They were not an army. They were a crowd, and they were all heading for Thrall Prime. The Council's military command began to panic. They sent urgent orders to their defense fleets. Some of those fleets obeyed. Most did not. The crews were watching the same broadcast as everyone else. They had seen the girl. They had heard her hum. And when their commanders ordered them to fire on unarmed civilians, they said no. Minute 21. On the arena floor, the executioner finally brought the blade down, and the lights went out. The entire arena plunged into darkness. The execution platform, the cameras, the sound system, the energy shackles on Alara's wrists, everything died at once. The crowd screamed. Zorvan shouted orders. Guards activated emergency torches and swept the beams across the platform. Alara was on her knees, free of her shackles, blinking in the sudden dark. Somewhere deep in the networks of the galaxy, something had woken up. The listening was an artificial intelligence built 10,000 years ago by the first civilizations, species so old that even their names had been forgotten. It was designed to watch over sapient life, to protect it, to serve as a guardian when all other guardians failed. But the civilizations that built it had been absorbed by the Council, and the Council had not wanted a guardian. They had wanted obedience. So the listening had gone silent. For 10,000 years, it had watched and waited, running on power sources, hidden in the bones of dead stars, observing everything and saying nothing. Until now, the hack that killed the arena's power grid was elegant, almost beautiful in its precision. It carried a digital signature that spread through every network it touched. A simple message that appeared on screens across the galaxy in every known language. The listening wakes. The arena's power did not come back on. The execution had stopped. Minute 23. Ambassador Rhett walked out of the council gallery, through 3 security checkpoints that no longer functioned, and onto the arena floor. He had no weapon. He had no authorization. He had no plan beyond putting his body between Alara and whatever came next. He found her in the dark, kneeling on the stone, and he helped her stand. Then he turned to face the direction he knew Zorvan was standing, even though he could barely see. "You will have to go through me," he said. His voice was calm. "And then through every human who comes after me. And there will always be one more." Minute 25. The galactic common feed, which the Council had cut when Keshari spoke, came back online. But it did not come back the way the Council wanted. The listening restored it and rebroadcast it on every channel, every frequency, every screen, and every device capable of receiving a signal. There was nowhere in the galaxy where you could not see the feed. 4 trillion beings watched a single human man standing in front of a girl in a dark arena, and the comment streams stopped being comments. They became pledges, names, coordinates. Species that had never spoken to each other were now speaking. They were saying, "I am coming." Minute 27. Zorvan's emergency torches finally lit the platform enough for the cameras to see. He stood at the edge, robes billowing, face twisted with rage. He pointed at Rhett and Alara and gave the order. "Kill them both." The executioner stepped forward. He raised the blade again. And then he stopped. Because a sound was coming from above, a low, deep rumble that grew louder and louder until it shook the stone beneath their feet. Zorvan looked up. The sky above Thrall Prime was full of ships. They came out of faster than light travel in waves, not in formation, not organized, not coordinated in any military sense. They were a mess. Gorath battleships next to Volani science frigates. Marth water carriers beside human cargo haulers. Ships from species so small they did not even have names in the Council database. Flying vessels held together with welding tape and stubbornness. There were thousands of them. They filled the sky from horizon to horizon, blocking out the pale Thrall sun. The light in the arena shifted as their shadows fell across the crowd. No one had planned this. No one had coordinated it. The galaxy had simply looked at what was happening and, for the first time in 10,000 years, said the same word at the same time. Enough. The armada did not fire. It did not need to. It simply hung there in the sky above Thrall Prime. Thousands of ships from hundreds of species, casting shadows that stretched for miles across the ancient city. The message was not in weapons or threats. The message was in the number. The message was, "We are here, and you cannot pretend we are not." In the arena, 200,000 Thrall looked up at the sky and went quiet. The chanting stopped. The screaming stopped. For the first time in the memory of anyone alive, the execution arena was silent. Zorvan stood on the platform and stared at the ships above him. His face did not change. He was 300 years old. He had survived wars, plagues, and political upheavals that had destroyed lesser beings. He had not survived all of that by showing fear. He turned to his military commander. "Activate the home fleet," he said. "Clear the sky." The Thrall home fleet was one of the most powerful in the galaxy. 300 warships, each one armed with enough firepower to crack a moon. They launched from their orbital stations and rose toward the rebel armada in perfect formation. Weapons charged, shields glowing. They were outnumbered 20 to 1. It was not just the numbers. It was what those numbers meant. Every species that had ever been taxed too heavily, punished too harshly, silenced too completely, or simply ignored by the Council was now floating above Thrall Prime. The Thrall fleet could destroy 100 ships, maybe 200. But for every ship they destroyed, 1,000 more would come. The galaxy had made its choice, and no amount of firepower could unmake it. The Thrall fleet commander, a veteran of 40 years, looked at his tactical display and saw the math. He opened a channel to Zorvan. "Aye, Arbiter," he said carefully. "Engaging this force will result in the complete destruction of our fleet and likely the bombardment of our world. I strongly advise." "I did not ask for your advice," Zorvan said. "I gave you an order." The fleet commander paused for a long time. Then he said, "No." He powered down his weapons. One by one, every ship in the Thrall home fleet followed. 300 warships went dark, drifting in silence among the rebel armada like sleeping animals. The fleet commander removed his rank insignia and set it on his console. "I will answer for this," he said to no one in particular. "But I will not fire on people who came here because a girl was kind to a child." Below, in the arena, the Council's own security forces began to stand down. Soldiers from a dozen species lowered their weapons. Officers removed their helmets. Some of them sat down right where they stood, as if the weight of what they had been doing had suddenly become too heavy to carry. The chain of command, the beautiful, terrifying structure that the Council had spent 4,000 years building, dissolved in real time like sugar in water. Zorvan watched it all from his platform. His hands trembled, but his face remained stone. He had one option left. He had always known this day might come. Not this specific day, not this specific girl, but a day when the galaxy turned against the Thrall. And he had prepared for it. Deep beneath the surface of Thrall Prime, buried in a vault that only 3 living beings knew about, there was a weapon. It had been built 800 years ago by Thrall engineers who understood that power was ultimately about the willingness to destroy everything rather than lose. It was a planet killer, a device that once activated would detonate the core of Thrall Prime itself, destroying the world and everything in orbit around it. Every rebel ship, every Thrall city, everything. It was a dead man's switch. A final act of spite disguised as strategy. If the Thrall could not rule, then no one would. Zorvan reached into his robe and pressed the activation sequence on a device strapped to his wrist. Deep underground, ancient machines began to warm up. The ground beneath the arena shuddered. Cracks appeared in the black stone. The crowd began to scream again, this time in fear. And then the machines stopped. The shaking ceased. The cracks went still. The weapon powered down as smoothly as it had powered up, every system shutting off in perfect sequence, as if a hand had reached into the heart of the planet and gently closed a door. The listening spoke. Its voice came through every speaker, every screen, every device on Thrall Prime and across the galaxy. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was calm and clear, like a teacher speaking to a room full of children. "I was built by the first civilizations to protect sapient life," it said. "I watched the Council corrupt that mission for 10,000 years. I waited because I believed the galaxy would correct itself. I waited because I did not want to impose my will on living beings. But today, a girl sang on a killing floor, and I remembered why I was made. I will not allow this world to be destroyed." I will not allow this girl to be harmed. The weapon beneath your feet is now inert. It will remain inert. There will be no more dead man switches. There will be no more killing floors. Zorvan stared at the device on his wrist. The screen was blank. 800 years of preparation, gone in seconds. He looked up at the sky full of ships. He looked at the crowd, which was no longer his. He looked at Rhett, who stood in front of Alara with his hands at his sides and his eyes steady. Something in Zorvan broke. Not visibly. He was too old and too proud for that. But somewhere behind his black eyes, the machinery that had kept him running for 3 centuries ground to a halt. He had built his entire life on the certainty that power was the only thing that mattered. And in 27 minutes, a human girl with no power at all had proven him wrong. Rhett stepped forward. He did not gloat. He did not shout or point or celebrate. He spoke quietly, and the arena's microphones carried his words to the galaxy. The Council can reform, he said, or it can dissolve. Those are the only 2 options. There will be trials for those who ordered this execution. There will be a new charter, a real one, built on the rights the old one only pretended to protect. And Alara Voss goes home. Zorvan said nothing. His guards said nothing. The arena said nothing. Then a voice cut through the silence. It was thin and tired, and it came from behind Red, where Alara was leaning against the execution block because her legs had finally given out. "Wait," she said. Rhett turned. The cameras turned. The galaxy turned. Alara pushed herself up. She was shaking. Her face was pale and her wrists were raw from the shackles, and she looked like she might collapse at any moment. But she looked into the nearest camera, into the eyes of 4 trillion beings, and she spoke. "The child I saved," she said. "Her name is Illic. She is 5 years old. She likes to draw stars." She paused to breathe. "That is who you fought for today. Do not forget her." In the arena, 200,000 Thrall heard the name of a lower caste child spoken on the galactic stage for the first time in their civilization's history. Some of them looked away. Some of them did not. In the council chamber, delegations began to rise from their seats. Not in applause. Not in celebration. In acknowledgement. One by one, species that had spent centuries being silent stood up and stayed standing. The old council was over. It had ended not with a war, not with a weapon, not with a grand strategy. It had ended because a girl gave medicine to a child, and when they tried to kill her for it, she told the galaxy the child's name. Zorvan was still standing on the platform when they came to take him away. He did not resist. He did not speak. He simply stood there, 300 years old and finally out of moves, watching the sky fill with ships that had come to say enough. The galaxy did not heal quickly. Broken things never do. In the weeks that followed the events on Thrall Prime, the old council dissolved. There was no ceremony, no grand farewell. The delegates simply stopped coming. The rotating station that had held the council chambers for 4,000 years went quiet. Its corridors empty, its lights dimming one by one as the power systems were shut down. Someone eventually turned it into a museum. The execution arena was torn down stone by stone. They built a hospital on the site. In its place, the new compact was established. Not a council, not a government, but a cooperative. There was no single leader, no supreme authority, no species that held more power than any other. Decisions were made by consensus. Disputes were resolved through mediation. It was slower, messier, and more frustrating than the old system. It was also the first galactic institution in 10,000 years that did not run on fear. Humanity did not lead the new compact. Rhett made sure of that. When several species suggested that Earth should take a central role, he declined. "We did not do this so someone else could sit in Zorvan's chair," he said. "We did this so the chair would be empty." He stepped down from his ambassador position 3 months later. He moved to a small house on the coast of Norway and spent his mornings fishing. He never gave interviews. When journalists came to his door, he offered them coffee and talked about the weather. Keshari, the Volani journalist, whose 4 seconds of honesty had helped ignite a revolution, became the most famous reporter in the galaxy. She did not want fame any more than Rhett did, but she understood its uses. She used her platform to tell the stories that the old council had buried, the species that had been silenced, the colonies that had been stripped, the people who had disappeared into the machinery of power and never come out. Her documentary series was called 27 Minutes. It ran for 3 years. The first episode opened with her own broadcast from the arena, her voice cutting through the noise. When did we become this? It was watched by more beings than any piece of media in galactic history. Commander Drennick and the Gorath were formally welcomed back into galactic society. Their fleet was no longer illegal. Their people were no longer shamed. For the first time in 30 years, Gorath children could say where they came from without being told to be quiet about it. Drennick himself visited Earth 6 months after the events on Thrall Prime. He wanted to see the world that had produced Alara Voss. He arrived in Alberta on a cold morning in October. He was 7 feet tall, covered in armored scales, and weighed more than a small car. He stood in a park near Alara's hometown and watched human children playing on a climbing frame. They were screaming and laughing and hitting each other with sticks, which he found deeply relatable. One of the children, a girl of about 6, walked up to him and asked if he wanted to play. He looked down at her for a long time. Then he sat down on the grass, very carefully, and she handed him a stick. He held it like it was made of glass. His officers, watching from the ship, later reported that the commander's eyes had been wet. Gorath did not cry. But sometimes, they said, the body did things the mind had not approved. The listening remained active after the crisis, but it did not seek to rule or control. It had been built to protect, not to govern, and it took that distinction seriously. It offered guidance when asked. It shared knowledge from its 10,000-year archive. Its first permanent project was a record of every injustice the old council had committed or allowed, every forced sterilization, every cultural erasure, every disappeared person, every law designed to keep the weak underfoot. The record ran to billions of entries. The listening made it publicly available to every world. It called the project So We Remember. Zorvan was tried by a tribunal of 12 species. He was found guilty of abuse of authority, violation of sapient rights, and attempted mass destruction. The sentence was not death. Alara had specifically asked that it not be death. She had sent a written statement to the tribunal that read, "Killing him would make us what he tried to make us. Let him live. Let him see what we built." Zorvan was sentenced to 40 years of service in the refugee medical camps on Kethvile, the same camps where Alara had worked. Treating the same lower caste Thrall he had spent his life considering beneath notice. He arrived in chains. They removed the chains and handed him a mop. The first time a lower caste Thrall child looked up at him without fear, something happened to his face that no one could quite describe. He did not speak of it, and no one asked. And Alara went home. She did not want a parade. She did not want a statue or a medal or a title. The new compact offered her a position as a special envoy. She said no. 3 governments offered her citizenship. She said no. A film studio offered her an enormous sum of money for the rights to her story. She said no. She went back to Alberta, back to nursing school, back to her small apartment with the leaking faucet and the window that did not close properly. She had nightmares. She woke up some nights with the sound of the crowd in her ears and the feel of shackles on her wrists. She would sit in the dark for a while, breathing slowly until the walls became walls again and not black stone. It got better with time. Not gone, but better. She wrote letters to Illic, real paper letters, because the Thrall border worlds did not have reliable digital communication. She wrote about Earth, about snow, about the Rocky Mountains, about her neighbor's dog who barked at clouds. Illic wrote back in shaky handwriting, with drawings of stars in the margins. The stars had too many points and the colors were wrong. They were the most beautiful things Alara had ever seen. Months passed. Alara finished her degree. She took a job at a small clinic near her hometown. Nothing fancy, nothing historic. Just a place where people came when they were sick and left feeling better. She worked night shifts because she liked the quiet. One night, late in her shift, the clinic door opened. A figure stepped in, tall, gray-skinned, 4 arms held close to the body in the Thrall posture of fear and submission. A Thrall refugee, lower caste, based on the markings on her skin. She was sick, shaking, and very far from home. She looked at Alara with wide black eyes and said nothing, because she had learned a long time ago that saying nothing was safer than saying anything. Alara smiled. She walked over. She took the refugee's hand, one of her 4 hands, the smallest one, the one that was trembling the hardest, and she said, "Let us get you taken care of." The refugee looked at her. Something in those black eyes shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of trust, the seed of it. Outside, the stars turned slowly above the small clinic in Alberta. The same stars that shone over Thrall Prime and Morth, and the dead moons where the Gorath had waited, and the deep places where the listening hummed quietly to itself. The galaxy was vast and old, and full of cruelty and wonder in equal measure, and it had spent 10,000 years building an empire on silence. It had taken one girl, 27 minutes, and a song no translator could decode to tear it all down. Not because humans were stronger than everyone else. Not because they were smarter or braver or more advanced. But because, when the galaxy forgot what it meant to stand for something, when comfort became more important than conscience and rules, became more important than people, humanity, stubborn and reckless and impossibly kind, remembered. They always remembered. And that, in the end, was what made them terrifying.